Welcome to our Getting Hybrid Work Right call. We've got a great guest today, as usual. My name's Tom Stone, and I'm here with I4CP. We are a human capital research firm. For those of you not familiar with us, we discover the people practices that truly drive high-performance organizations to ever higher levels of success. When we say high performance, we mean revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction. So when we do research here at I4CP and send out surveys on best practices across the human resources umbrella, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the high quartile companies, the top 25%. What are they doing differently compared to their lower performing counterparts? We tease that out in our reports and infographics and case studies and provide that to our member organizations. This is just a small sample of our member companies at I4CP. You see a nice mix here of different industries, different size companies. Of course, we have some of the biggest players out there like the Amazon, Microsoft, Accenture, and so on. But a lot of healthcare companies, a lot of banks across really all industries. So if you're with any I4CP member company and on the call with us today, welcome. Great to have you with us. If you're not an I4CP member and are interested to learn more, by all means, reach out to myself. Reach out to our my co-host here, Kevin Oakes, our CEO and co-founder. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Hey, Tom, good to see you again.
Good to be with you as always.
It's good to see we've got a lot of familiar faces as well on the line and familiar names. So thanks everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. As I was saying, just reach out to really anyone at I4CP if you're interested in learning more about what we do. As I said at the outset, this is our latest Getting Hybrid Work Right call series, which many of you have been attending these now for many months. We hold these every other Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. You can see we've got our next one coming up on the 15th, mid-September. We'll have Russell Robinson from the Department of Health and Human Services. I think I saw Russell on the line today, so welcome, Russell, if you're there. In between our Getting Hybrid Work Right calls, we focus on different areas of HR, learning and development, HR strategy, talent acquisition, and DE&I. Next week, we'll have Ramona Agora from Dell as our special guest, talking about all the things they're doing in learning and development over at Dell. And then coming up on the 29th, we're going to have a special version of this Getting Hybrid Work Right call. Kevin, can you say a few words about this? Because we're going to be featuring you, actually.
Yeah, and hopefully you're joining me, Tom, but we're going to talk about how critical learning is to a healthy culture. This is something that several of our members have asked us to address a little bit deeper and want to have a deeper conversation around, but it's also something we've written a lot about in the past. And it's very clear that when we look at healthy cultures and high-performing organizations, they tend to have very robust L&D programs. They put a lot of attention to learning overall and have a culture of learning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to create that culture of learning going forward.
Yeah, I will definitely be there, and I'll be in particularly good spirits because September 29th happens to be my birthday. So I will be.
We're going to all sing happy birthday to you, Tom. Then.
Yeah, I probably will. I probably will regret having said that. But I hope many of you on the call today will join us on the 29th for that great conversation on overall healthy cultures and the role that learning plays in it. A couple of other quick reminders, and then we're going to get to the introduction of our special guest for today. We have a conference that we hold every March in Scottsdale, Arizona at the beautiful Fairmont that you see here. It's our Next Practices Now conference. This is where we really highlight a lot of the research that we've done over the past years, research that'll be coming up on best and next practices across human capital management. Every year we have a great lineup of speakers. In the past, we've had really notable book authors like Dan Pink and Brene Brown, and we have researchers from academia. We'll have CHROs and CEOs even from leading companies. It's a little different than other conferences in that we don't have a trade show. There's no expo, so there's no consultants, no vendors. They're hitting you up in the hallways for sales and so on. It's just a place for about 500 or so top HR leaders. Some of them even bring their teams and treat it as a development time for their folks to really just get together, peer network, and learn the latest, best, and next practices and some of the latest research. We, a couple of years, couldn't do it in person, of course. We pivoted to virtual, and now, like many events, we're doing both in person and virtual. It's been open for registration for a little while. Registrations are already pouring in. We're going to be announcing a lot of the details of the speaker lineup here coming up soon. Don't think we're quite ready to do that yet, right, Kevin? But coming up soon.
Coming up soon, that's right.
All right, very good. I've been to this conference several times, and I go to a lot of HR and L&D conferences, and I can definitely say that this one is a leading event for sure. All right, without any further ado then, let's get to today's special guest and the conversation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Kevin, to introduce Nina.
Yeah, well, one company that's been a constant presence at our conference over the years has been LinkedIn. So we're thrilled to have Nina McQueen here with us. She, as you can see on the screen, is the VP of Global Talent, Benefits, and Employee Experience, which I think we're probably going to focus a lot on that last part of your title there, Nina. Nina, welcome. We're thrilled that you joined us today.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, Nina, you've been at LinkedIn for a while. It's been almost a decade, and I love all the different roles that you've had at LinkedIn. You've had quite a wide variety of fantastic leadership roles in human capital. Earlier in your career, you were at Yahoo for a couple times. You were at Facebook. So tell us a little bit about your career within HR, and then, more specifically, what you're doing at LinkedIn.
Sure, happy to. So I've spent most of my career in Silicon Valley tech. As you mentioned, I've led a lot of different areas of HR, but employee benefits has sort of become my sweet spot over the years. However, back in the 90s, when I was at Yahoo, that's when my focus first started to shift towards the employee experience. But it was very different than it is today. Back in those days, it was a lot around the perks, things like foosball, all day long lattes, fancy cafeterias. And we used to use perks to attract young talent. And I went on to do that at a few tech companies, always having these bigger and more elaborate perks over time. But then about a little over 9 years ago, I came to LinkedIn. And while they also wanted to have cool perks, it just wasn't about the perks. And it was here at LinkedIn when I really started to understand the critical role the company culture plays in creating an exceptional employee experience. So perks don't inspire you to do your best work. And I think that the greatest factor in retaining great talent starts and stops with company culture and the people who lead others. So I have worn a lot of hats at LinkedIn. I've led diversity, inclusion, and belonging, engagement, global mobility. I was even the interim chief people officer back in 2020 when the pandemic hit. Today, I lead benefits, wellness, and then a team we call the Employee Experience Team, which also runs a lot of the programs that help sort of brings our culture to life.
So don't undersell the perks there at LinkedIn. I've been visiting LinkedIn for many years, and I remember for a long time I felt like you had the best corporate cafeteria of any company I would visit. So that was a good perk.
I think it actually was officially at some point called that the best cafeteria in Silicon Valley. We have some amazing chefs.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure over the last couple of years, there's, things have changed for all of us, of course, and certainly at LinkedIn, you've undergone a number of changes. I'd love to hear a little bit about how the employee experience has changed during that time. And I know you want to tell us a little bit about your Lift Up program, which is a really cool program, and love to spend a little bit of time on that.
Yeah, so I'm sure like many people on the call, and by the way, I've kind of been scrolling through who's attending, and I see a ton of people that I've known through the years. Chuck, Amy, just a ton of you. It's great to be here with you guys. But if, like everybody, back in March of 2020, we all just one day got up from our desks and went home, completely unexpected, and we were unsure of everything happening around us. And like a lot of HR professionals, a great concern was how our employees were doing. So it was at that time that I sent out a company-wide survey to everybody around the world with a simple question. I asked, how are you? And what I received back was thousands of comments with themes around feelings of burnout, isolation and depression, stress with family responsibilities, and then of course, just missing social interactions. And so it was that feedback that helped us focus our efforts into an initiative that we call Lift Up. And it was designed to provide managers and employees with tools and resources that they needed to support their well-being and productivity during what ended up being a very long extended work from home period. So, and part of that was, the heads were hung low. It was dark times. So we wanted to also find ways to lift their spirits by creating some surprise and delight moments along the way. And these included things like we hosted a virtual music festival featuring our own employee talent, along with some celebrity headliners to join in. And then we replaced what used to be holiday parties with what we called our Silver Linings event. This is when employees submitted videos around sort of their high points or their happy moments throughout the year, focusing on things like weddings and babies and maybe just learning how to make, sourdough bread. And then, as you see on the screen here, to keep the drumbeat going, I actually still speak at the company all hands every 2 weeks, and this is where I announce what's coming up next. And so we use this graphic of a balloon that you see on the screen with the ever-growing string that was serving as like a timeline. So what this did is this is just 1 year. We created one of these for each year. This allowed employees to be reminded about what we'd already launched. So whatever we launched, we kept on the timeline. Then this was our chance to announce whatever was coming up next. And then that dotted line off to the right lets them know that there's more to come. And then sort of this idea around surprise and delight, this unexpected nature of it, it created a lot of buzz amongst employees. And they began to look forward to the Lift Up segment at our company all hands. And just to be clear, this was never intended to go on forever. I think when we launched it, we thought it would be through the end of 2020. And of course, then it went into 2021 with the plan to wrap up at December of last year. And then Omicron happened. And so we haven't quite wrapped it up yet, but the idea is that this will eventually come to an end.
I think if there's one thing we've all learned, it's not to put deadlines on things during this last 2.5 years. Those deadlines just keep getting extended and extended. I noticed, so you have the Silver Lining Show hosted by Mindy Kaling on here, and I know that she's doing some more specific work with LinkedIn. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work with Mindy.
I don't have a lot to add on that side of the business. I'm really we brought her in as employee experience. We brought in Jason Sudeikis, John Legend, Matthew McConaughey came and talked about his Green Lights book, which was all about how to see the positive in things. So I don't have a lot more to say around Mindy and our business association.
No, but you just made all of us very, very jealous in the process.
Yeah, when you first mentioned, when we had a prep call of this visual, for one thing, I was intrigued by it because I love the idea that you're keeping in front of employees all the things that you've been doing. It doesn't hurt to recommunicate and remind them of all these things, but also the trailing ... to the right to show that this isn't ending, it's going to continue. I didn't realize some of the celebrity names that would be showing up here, but I also like the fact that you're including on here some of the, we could say a little, less thrilling things, but I think very important, the no meeting days. I'm curious what the reaction from employees have been to that. I see you're not just doing it once, but it looks like once every month. What's been the reaction for those?
So before I tell you that, I do want to just share one thing. So, when, and I'm just talking to my peers out there who are looking at putting in programs like this, when we first started to look at this, what we found was happening when the pandemic first hit was that there were a whole lot of teams who wanted to jump in and help. So whether it is finance thinking about how to fund setting up your home office, or whether it was learning and development going virtual, or our wellness team going virtual, there were just tons of teams who wanted to jump in and help and do things for our employees. But if we each did those individually, it didn't tie together. And so that's when we launched Lift Up, we brought all these teams together to collaborate so that we were sharing it under the name of Lift Up. So it did become bigger and bigger and bigger rather than it operating in a silo like we know so often happens. So on the no meeting days, when we were looking at all these aspects, so, like I said, family responsibilities, burnout, keeping burnout at bay, we knew that we wanted to create an opportunity for employees to catch their breath. And we experimented with this, it's a live and learn. So we experimented with this with our first no meeting day and just said, hey, look, this is a day when it doesn't mean business doesn't keep going. So if you are talking to clients, that still happens. If you're interviewing candidates, that still happens. But it's a day where we give each other a break to give each other a break internally at the company. So it's a day I don't have to be on camera. It's a day when I can catch up on all my email. It's a day when I have a chance to like think, just to give me a chance to dream big. And so we experimented with it, and we did it one time, overwhelming response. We then sprinkled it a couple more times throughout the year, and it just kept getting all this buzz. And this is a no cost item for employers. It doesn't cost you any money to have a no meeting day. People ended up being very productive, but it just gave them that break. And so we made the decision end of last year that we were going to make this a part of our culture going forward. So it's the first Friday of every month is a no meeting day, and it's probably one of my favorite days.
So tomorrow's a no meeting day then.
Tomorrow, on another note, so again, mental health and well-being has been a huge focus. And I don't know about other employers out there, but I know at LinkedIn, you know, when we went work from home, we didn't have real good starts and stops to our day. You know, you kind of roll out of bed, you start working, and there were no breaks in between. We didn't commute. We didn't walk to conference rooms. We didn't fight for conference rooms. And so you're on all the time. And so we knew people really needed a break. So another thing we did was sprinkle some well-being days throughout the year. In 2021, before the vaccination was available, we actually did a whole week off. We called it Rest Up Week. But since the vaccine and this last year, we just sprinkled a few days through, and tomorrow is our last day. And so when I looked at it globally, we picked 5 days. I put up all the holidays of every country around the world, and I tried to look for opportunities where maybe they had a bank holiday on a Monday, so we could give a Friday, allowing people a 4-day weekend. And this is our last one tomorrow. And the US and Canada are benefiting from a 4-day weekend.
That's fantastic. And I wish we had those bank holidays in the US. I miss those when I used to work a lot in Europe. Well, let's shift gears a little bit to the subject of our webinar here around hybrid and flexible work, and would love to just hear what LinkedIn's approach has been to that, Nina, and then what went into developing it. So just to start out with the approach.
Okay, so our approach is to hybrid and remote work is we've just centered everything on trust and care. So we trust each other to do our best work where it works best for us and our teams. We do expect more of us will be remote than we were, say, pre-COVID, but we're going to continue to create amazing office experiences for everyday work and the times when we do come together. And we're just going to continue to just learn and adjust as we go.
So is there a policy within the organization then around return to office, or is it left up to managers and employees?
Well, so everything we've been doing has been trial and error. Early on there were some companies who made some bold statements that they were going to be fully remote workforce, and while that worked for them, we just felt we needed to take more of a wait and see approach. So I'm sure people can relate that and you said this earlier, that we thought we were going to return to the office several times over the last couple of years, but inevitably ended up with delay after delay. So what we decided to do was just to follow local guidance, and we began opening up our offices well over a year ago. But most of those who were early returnees, they were returning for reasons why they wanted to be in the office, which varied. And it could have been because they didn't have a great workspace at home, or maybe they had roommates, or perhaps they needed to collaborate in person. They just missed the cafe. But when we began to think about hybrid, we really debated whether or not we were going to dictate the number of days that you would need to be in the office. That definitely was probably some early thinking, but over time we've evolved that again. And part of that was better defining for us, what does it mean to be remote versus what does it mean to be hybrid? And it's about how we work. So those of us who are hybrid, we live within a reasonable distance to commute to the company, to the office. We work from home when we want, and we come into the office when there's important work for us to do together. But the specific amount of time teams spend in person together probably differs from team to team and can change, over time. And some hybrid employees might be in the office every single day. So that is what a hybrid is. It's anything. But then for those who choose to be fully remote, they will likely only visit LinkedIn offices for important meetings and events, and it's their home office that becomes their primary place of work. And we're going to try and support remote wherever possible, but there's a number of considerations. So employees will work with their manager to ensure that they and their team are able to do their best work.
Nina, one of the things we always like to find out from companies is how they've shifted how they listen to their employees during these past 2.5 years. There's been an explosion of that, so much so that there's new vendors and new tool providers that are hawking their platforms for this kind of thing, or at least new features. What was the process when you've said, when we've thought about hybrid and our plans for the return to office and so on? What role, what maybe increased role, like in terms of frequency of surveying and maybe focus groups or whatnot? How did you go about that, listening to what employees wanted?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So probably a few different things. We had, prior to the pandemic, moved to a quarterly EVS, employee voice survey is what we call it. Prior to that, we probably did it once a year, and it was probably like, I don't know, 60 questions. So before that, we did move to the quarterly. We keep it around 12 to 15 questions. And some of those questions repeat every quarter, like how happy are you working at LinkedIn? And then others would be more relevant to what's happening. But we've definitely had a shift in what we're asking around how people work when they come in. Are they, making certain decisions? Does it matter whether they're remote? Do they make it better? What does the team collaboration look like? So we have, and it's been quarterly, we've been asking these questions over and over and over, trying to find those patterns, trying to look at data. We also do pulse surveys occasionally, but we also have a group called the Trusted Advisors. We started this during the pandemic, which is a group of employees who represent all locations, levels in the organization, different teams around the organization. And we use them as a sounding board. As we start to come up with ideas, we bounce it off of them and get their feedback. And again, they are everything from an entry-level employee to a vice president. And so we can get that voice across. And then we just, do a lot of focus groups with people managers, the executive team. It's really across all kinds of things that we try to gather this data. And then of course we look at data like not only how people are feeling about it, but what are performance levels looking like, what's happening with hiring, and patterns of coming in and out of the office, and then how people are being productive.
I'm glad you mentioned the looking at performance levels. Mervyn in the chat asked, are you measuring productivity with these changes? The difference between maybe folks in the office full-time versus remote versus hybrid. So it sounds like you are looking at those kind of numbers as you proceed here.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. So I'm sure a lot of you, recognize that it's very hard to measure productivity. It's a little easier to measure it, like say in a sales team, because you can kind of really look at some numbers and figures and data. But when you're looking at other teams, it's hard to do. So overall performance has been great. From what our data tells us, our employees are engaged. They're generally good well-being. That we've got high retention, productivity and flexibility is something that they appreciate. They're figuring out new ways to connect. They're figuring out new ways to be productive. They come into the office, like I said, for different reasons at different times. And I think if anything, what it's told us is the future is not a one size fits all.
Mm. And Nina, a couple of times you've talked about the global reach that you have at LinkedIn and employees around the globe. What differences are you seeing in different regions of the world?
From a perspective
of return to office and just really how people are embracing this new world of work.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because again, going back a couple of years when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of people who wanted to go home from wherever they were. Maybe it's to go home to be with family. Maybe it's they wanted to take care of somebody. But of course, there's a lot of complication with moving to a new country where we maybe don't have an entity, we don't have taxes set up, there's consequences to this, there's limited time that you can be there, there's work authorizations. So that has been hugely challenging. And so, we've done our best to accommodate. Right now, if people do want to work remote, the requirement is that they go someplace that we already have an entity, because that certainly helps a lot. So we are seeing a little bit more dispersed maybe on the international side, because I mean, if you're working in Dublin, there's people from so many different countries that maybe want to go home. In the
Sure.
US, we are seeing people go remote to different locations, but I think where it really benefits us is in the ability to hire diversity, because there's a whole lot of people who don't want to or can't afford to live in San Francisco.
Right.
And that is no longer a barrier. I mean, we can hire people from anywhere across the United States. It's much easier in the United States, obviously. And so that's removed a barrier and really kind of opened up our hiring pool much broader than it was before.
Yeah, I've had this discussion with our, some members of our Chief Diversity Officer board and other folks in the D&I community. I'm a little surprised there's not a little bit more pushback on companies that are having all employees return to office and not accepting any remote or hybrid work from the D&I community, because it seems to me it's just making it a heck of a lot easier to have a more diverse workforce when you do accept remote workers.
I think it also depends on what the industry is that the employer is working in. So like I said, some made bold statements, we're going to be all work from home. And that might be really conducive to the business environment they're in. We've heard others say, everybody back to the office. It's not for me to say why that works for them or doesn't work for them. For us, I think that trust and care is something we've really anchored on, and trusting people to do their best wherever that might be. But it's evolving. We don't have all the answers. This is nothing any of us had a roadmap for. We're all learning, experimenting, and keeping that growth mindset.
Yeah, I'm convinced that when we look back on this time period 5 years from now, we'll just kind of chuckle at our naivete around some of these issues.
Well, can I just add, so kind of just going back in time, prior to the pandemic, maybe a couple of years before that, we at LinkedIn started talking about what does remote look like? And, we all have technology, we all should be able to enable remote working. And it would always be sort of that, we should look at that. And it would get deprioritized because of other, things happening in the organization. But when we did talk about it, we put these barriers in front of it. You had to be a high performer. We would test it out for 6 months. You would have to come to the office for so often. All these people would have to approve it. You'd have to be at a certain level. Like we created a ton of barriers for people being able to work remote. And then we all did it. And now we realize that was, so, I think it's absolutely fascinating how the world's evolving.
A question or just a conversation I struggle with a little bit is when we talk about what's best for the workforce, we're often talking about doing what's right personally for the individual. And we've all learned that, there's a number of different caregivers that are in our workforce that we didn't realize. People have different situations, and managers are encouraged to do what's right for the individual. Yet that flies in the face of fairness and equity in some cases, right, where you're trying to make sure you treat everybody the same. I'm just curious how you've wrestled with that, Nina, and tried to handle that at LinkedIn.
It's tough, and I mean, I think this plays out in other areas even than just hybrid and flex and remote. So I mean, even like in my benefits world, we've made the decision to take an egalitarian approach in each country that we're in, meaning that whether you're an entry-level employee or the most senior person there, you get the same benefits. But we also then try to and have put in a lot of flexibility around personalization. So another example of that would be we have this thing called Perk Up, which is a perks allowance. In the US, it's $2,000, which an employee can use for student loans, childcare, financial planning, housekeeping, tax prep, all kinds of things. Everybody gets the same amount, so that's where we're consistent, but then what you choose to use it for is where the personalization comes in. And we have lots of examples of that throughout the company. When it comes to hybrid and managers, I think managers are the ones who probably struggle the most. We have tried to support our managers in as many ways as possible, role modeling, showing examples. One thing that we did early on in the pandemic was to create a people leaders meeting every month. We have a 60-minute meeting that is really focused on people managers, and it talks about all kinds of things related. It's finance and budgeting. It's, learning and development, it is benefits, it's FlexWorks, it's this opportunity where we present to them for a short period of time and then open it up to questions and try to answer their questions. And lots of times they raise things maybe we haven't thought about. And so we meet with them, we're trying to answer those questions and give them the support that they need. But we've also then created some workshops like managing a hybrid workforce or managing a remote workforce. But again, a lot of it is trial and error, and it's really just trying to give managers the confidence that they need to see how their team works best. Again, there's some teams, maybe it's site reliability engineers that need to be on site, or data center people, and there's others that don't. And so it's really what's conducive to that team and that leader.
Nina, I appreciate you going to the question of managers and how you've been supporting them. We had both Anahit, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Lorraine in the chat ask exactly that question. So thanks for already chiming in on how you've been supporting managers. Your thoughts there were around the synchronous sort of workshops and sessions you've had. Some other folks we've talked to have also done a lot in creating sort of performance support materials for managers and leaders, how to have certain conversations, how to, maybe courses on virtual leadership, leading a virtual team, things like that, or just documentation around the constantly shifting policies. What have you done that more on the asynchronous or content side to support managers?
So we've had a lot of workshops, as we're building these things out for managers and for employees. I mean, it really is helping, and again, during the pandemic, it was a lot more around how we help with burnout, keep calm and lead on, and courses around just recognizing what's happening with employees and how to help them work best. But there's one thing I want to say, which is every time I'm at a people leaders meeting, which I speak at every month, I think that managers are always coming from the perspective of themselves as well. So as much as we're asking managers to make these decisions and to have these trade-offs and to have these important conversations, they're employees too. And they are just as unsure about what they should be doing as we all are. So there's just so much trial and error going on here. We're just kind of working through it together.
Yeah, totally agree with that sentiment. I'm glad you said that, Nina, because I've sensed that in a lot of organizations where managers are just in a really tough time period here, trying to figure this out along with the organization.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out productivity. They're trying to figure out how to collaborate. They're trying to figure out how to do team building, how to do one-on-ones in a completely new way of working.
Yeah. Well, the chat has been pretty active, and in addition to just raving fans of you that we have in the chat, and there's some very nice comments about you. You should read the chat afterwards. I'll bring off mute John Boudreau. So John is a board member here at I4CP. We've worked with him for many, many years. He's a thought leader, and he's been pretty active in chat. John, you've had a couple of questions that you've posed. Do you want to come off mute and ask those of Nina live?
Thanks, Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, John.
Hi, Nina. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
This is unexpected. I'm not going to come on video, so yeah, I'm smiling like crazy. So I guess that I had two questions, and I'll just put them out there. Nina, you can do one or the other or both. Kevin, I'm just so touched that you gave me this platform. So one of them is let's see how to put it. So I'll just be a little edgy, Nina, if I can.
Okay.
So I think what you're doing looks a lot to me like agile development of work, like you might do with software or a product, where you're going to put it out there, you're going to hear from folks, you're going to systematically prioritize the elements where you should be experimenting. You're going to have good rules for the elements where you're not, product features that, I might say, I want this thing to be lime green. And you say to me, thank you, John, you're the only one that thinks that. And so sorry, something like that. And so I'm seeing, focus group parallels, that kind of thing in what you're saying. And then here's the edgy part. And then I hear trial and error, which sounds a little more chaotic to me than agile experimentation. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, it's
and I wonder if
my words.
Well, it's not, yeah, and I mean, with deep respect and complete admiration for what you're doing, and I'm sure you know more about it than I do, you know what I mean? But I wonder if you might talk to that, is it chaotic trial and error and, we just see what people want to do? Or is it closer to we're tracking this and we're systematically using what we learn to go back and do it like product or software?
Well, I can't define that it's like product or software because that's not my area of specialty. What I will tell you is that we set up a team called the Flex team. We now have a team who is dedicated to focusing on this. This team consists of really the team that was starting out during that pandemic as we were returning back to the office, looking at what was happening with local government suggestions around how to return to the office and what that looks like. So it started off with them. It also includes our global mobility team now, because of the fact that people were working from another country and we were moving around the area. So we bring these two teams together and they work very closely with partners all around outside of LinkedIn. They're doing research, they're looking at our data. It is a very thoughtful process they go through. It's just that there's no roadmap. And so probably it's my choice of words more than me not giving those people the credit for the amount of dedication and thoughtfulness that they're putting into it, but they then do seek that feedback. They bounce this off of like our trusted advisors, our leadership team, managers, our people managers, to see, we go in one direction, but then if there's something that isn't working, we pause and we think about it and we revisit it. So
yeah,
I think that we've said, okay, we are leading with trust and care. That is where we're starting from that point of. But anything can shift. Collaboration tools, how are those working? We do have challenges. I know managers have challenges. Let's say they want to bring their team together, but they've got a team member in Bangalore and one in London. That's not new. That was there before, but now we have even more people dispersed. So how do you create that equitable experience for somebody who's in the office versus somebody who's remote? These are challenges. And so that's where the trial and error, I think, is coming in. I don't know if that answered your question or not. It's a very
really helpful and a good example. I think it's, if anything, Nina, I'm kind of putting in a plug for this group to be sensitive to hearing when it is, I think you put it beautifully. You've got these teams and it sounds a lot to me like experimentation. I think my main plug here is to get folks to think about capturing those data that you described across the teams, et cetera, in a pretty systematic way. And, I would love, as I've said a lot, I'd love to see the HR profession step up and say, we'll be the hub for that kind of data gathering, agile experimentation. And we can call it trial and error, however, I think, really trial, like
A/B
experimental
testing,
trial.
A/B testing, whatever you might want to call it.
Exactly.
We have our people analytics team who looks deeply into all the data that we have available. So again, that's whether that's patterns in the workforce, whether that's patterns in the building, whether that's, again, one thing we're concerned about, remote employees and performance ratings. So we're right now going through our annual review period. We want to make sure that we're looking at promotions rates, performance ratings, that FaceTime element. There's so many different data points that we're looking at across, and then there's things that we haven't been able to measure yet and need to develop those tools to measure it. Productivity being one of them.
Thanks.
I'm glad you, thanks, John. And I'm glad you brought up that last point. Pamela in the chat was asking about that, sometimes what we call proximity bias that can creep in with folks that are, in the office versus remote. And just a plug for those on the call that are I4CP members, you have access, if you're not aware, to a proximity bias checklist that we created a few months ago and rolled out for members to really help with that issue of, are you getting more career progression if you're in the office with that FaceTime, as you mentioned, Nina, as opposed to being remote more days than not?
And we're looking at across our organization well-being. We're looking at senses of belonging, career progression. Right now, we're not seeing anything around the from a diversity perspective as being off, but it is something we're keeping our eye on because these things might develop over time and we need to not, keep on top of it.
And thanks, Zeta, for bringing up this slide on well-being, because that is an area I wanted to focus on with you, Nina. I know it's one that you're passionate about, and we've talked a lot about mental and emotional well-being more than probably anything else. We've certainly done a lot of research and work on it. Again, for I4HCP members, you have access to this study. In fact, we just did a new survey on financial well-being, which is an area that hasn't been explored too deeply, in our opinion. But I'd love to just hear a little bit about what LinkedIn has done in this area, Nina.
Sure. Well, so I'm going to start with sort of our overall that we've always done, which is we have 6 wellness tenets that we focus on: thoughts, breathing, hydration, nutrition, movement, and rest. And each year we go very deep into one of those, and they all have a catchy phrase: quest for rest, keep in mind, et cetera. And our focus for next year is financial well-being. So we are going one step beyond that and really doing that focus as well. But during this time, mental health and well-being is top of mind. We wanted to go through and identify the stages of stress that could lead to burnout, because we all have everyday stresses in our lives. That's inevitable. That's a part of life. But when they get out of hand, that's when you can lead towards burnout, and that's very concerning. And so recognizing that, talking about that, we partnered very closely with our EAP to provide workshops over the last couple of years on everything from re-entry anxiety. I remember when it was like, oh my gosh, I have to get the kids off, I have to commute. What do I wear? Because I haven't had pants on in a couple of years. How do I interact? I don't even know how to socially act anymore. So it was a workshop on re-entry anxiety, but other things that have come up in the world: social injustice, coping with the stresses of COVID. We also went through and increased our EAP to 25 visits a year. We have super high utilization of our EAP, off the charts utilization, because there's not an employee in the company who hasn't heard the name of our EAP. We talk about it all the time. Employees post about it internally on how it's helped them. And so we've had a lot of activity there. And then on the other side of it, I've already mentioned that we do the no meeting day. We had these wellness days. For summertime, for July and August, we did half-day Fridays. Again, people are working really hard. We are not seeing productivity suffer, but we definitely want to make sure that people are stepping away and getting that chance to rest and relax. So those are just some of the ideas that we've done.
On my drive in this morning, I saw numerous kids waiting for the school bus, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder what that's going to do to well-being. Is that maybe it improves well-being? I don't know, but it's another added layer of complexity, I think, for working families.
Yeah.
Nina, you mentioned the re-entry workshop, and Kelly in the chat was wanting to say a little bit more maybe about that. That's something we haven't heard from others.
Yeah, it was actually created by one of the therapists over at our EAP. So our EAP is Lyra, and they created this workshop. So, we had been asking about it. I think other employers have probably asked about it. And it really just takes you through recognizing those different stages of what you may be facing when you were returning to the office. And it's everything I mentioned. It's changing those routines at home. It's commuting. That was something that we hadn't done for a while. It was being concerned about COVID. It's being concerned. Do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? What does it mean for my family? What risks am I taking? And then it's also just that we don't have our muscle back on how to socialize. So I know for myself, I've been public speaking quite a bit over my career, being on stages, right? And being in person. All of a sudden we went to this. Well, this is a lot easier, and so I remember my boss was talking about speaking at a conference, and all of a sudden she had to think about how she moved and what she was wearing and engaging with the audience in such a different way. And it's just kind of a muscle we lost. So that was some of the elements of it.
I want to give you kudos too for making the pivot. It sounds like your next focus is going to be on financial well-being. As Kevin mentioned, we just did a pulse survey on that. And I think I either read an internal draft or maybe it's already been published. And I think it's a publicly available article that my colleague Carol Morrison has written. Zeta, if you're able in the background to look that up and maybe put the link to that in the chat, I hope it's one of our publicly available pieces. So we do have sort of hot off the presses data on financial well-being that we recently surveyed on. Interested, do you have any sense for what that is going to involve? I know it's still coming up as a focus area, but.
I have a team member who's extremely passionate about it, and she's been chomping at the bit to really try to help our employees. More than just going and purchasing something new or having a whole new platform, which very well might be something in our future, it's really talking about what we already offer today and having people get the most out of it. Having them think about, simple things like 401k. There was a time period when it was your parents who did the 401k, and then that wasn't for a certain group. And now we have a lot of people who, when we've looked at the survey data, things like retirement plans are actually raising up much, much higher on people's radar. Maybe it's because they saw their parents go through hard times or layoffs, right, or whatever might have happened. And so we're starting with what we have internally and just making the most of it. We've done a total rewards portal. We have lots of things. We just announced last week student loan assistance. So being able to give employees $5,250 towards paying down their student loan debt. So we have all these little elements. We just haven't pulled it together. And our hope and dream is that we go out and do a roadshow. So, over the years, we've done benefit roadshows, focused on different things, families and different. Our next one, we want it to be financial wellness, and we will do this globally. So getting out there and, probably later next year.
So Nina, our next survey that we're going to be launching here shortly really builds upon the culture work that we've done and what's changed since the start of the pandemic with corporate culture and how organizations are thinking about that going forward. And I saw Lisa just posted a question around employee experience in a hybrid workplace. I'd love to shift our conversation in this last few minutes to that, but I know we have a quick poll, and Zeta, if you could bring up this poll. We wanted to just ask about corporate culture and has it changed since the onset of the pandemic? In some cases, I think some companies have said it's been better. Other companies said, no, it's become worse. And we'd love to just hear a little bit about what you feel the culture is, how the culture's evolved at LinkedIn during this time period.
Yeah, I think that probably a lot of us know that a healthy culture does evolve over time. We've been on our culture journey for 19 years now, from, when we were a startup to hyper growth, we were acquired, becoming an established company. And each inflection point, there's been an opportunity to ensure that our culture continues to evolve as our company's growing. And we define culture as our collective personality. It's who we are, and it's who we aspire to be. And then our values are the principles that guide our day-to-day decision-making. So, together, those things for us, it arguably could be our competitive advantage. We survey employees who come into the company and ask them why they came. Benefits isn't as big a circle, or compensation, which was a surprise. The culture was the largest response on why they came to the company. But we have changed over the last couple of years. The world has changed immensely for everyone. So in the face of all that change, as a company, we've, adapted and evolved, as many have, but we stopped and asked ourselves, do we need to adapt and evolve our culture and values? So it was our CEO, and he was promoted to be our CEO in June of 2020. He really set out to learn. And so he went out and he talked to a whole lot of other CEOs. He also talked to our founders. And what he learned is that your vision, your why for your company is something that should rarely, if ever, change. But your culture and values, those might need to evolve. So he started out by setting 3 guiding principles on how to evaluate our culture. Are our culture and values still applicable in the current environment? Excuse me. Do they help us achieve our vision? And last, do we cite them frequently and with clarity? Do employees know it? And if they're not being used, if they're not being talked about, then maybe that's something we should be thinking about. So he tapped me on the shoulder, gosh, I think it was last year sometime, to help him listen and learn. And so we then had thousands of conversations with employees, our global leadership team, those trusted advisors I mentioned that are people across all functions, locations, and levels who carved out time in their day to help us go through this whole process. So with thousands of pieces of feedback, we learned that in many ways, our culture and values have stood the test of time. It turns out they are more applicable than ever. They do help us achieve our vision, but it turns out that employees aren't able to cite them with clarity. And in some cases, they were being misinterpreted. We have to remember that 40% of our workforce joined during the pandemic. So those folks have not lived and breathed in the office, the culture and values that is so prevalent. And then everyone else, of course, has been work from home. So we set out to create some clarity around culture and values. And so one of the things we did, we used to have tenants, and we created a culture statement. And then what we did with our values is we evaluated each one of them and we enhanced or clarified them where they needed to be. And so, at the end of the day, our culture is not about, the words on a wall or something on your badge or even company swag. It's about the thousands of decisions that we make as a team on a daily basis. And we use our culture and values as our foundation for that.
Wow, I love it. It's fantastic. You're just a quote machine, Nina. I feel like you
Oh,
have
God.
so many good,
Don't-
very interesting
That's
things to say.
terrifying.
Well, we got the results back here from our poll, and it's a little bit mixed. Just adding up the top two categories, over 50% said it's become better or much better or somewhat better. But over a third of people said their culture has deteriorated or become much worse, and that's a little concerning. So it'll be interesting. We're going to keep asking that question over a variety of events that we do, and it'll be interesting to see how that one unfolds overall. But I know, Nina, just as we wrap up here, you have a program called Reconnect, and
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we take a little bit of time to talk about this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited about it. So as I was mentioning, that Lift Up is wrapping up because we realized that, like I mentioned, we have this whole bunch of people who have never worked in the building. They've been remote since the day they started. And then the rest of us have been dispersed. So we wanted to go in this year focusing on coming together in a forward-looking and fresh way. So we wanted to re-energize our talent and have them feel like LinkedIn is still their employer of choice. We wanted to create excitement and connection, as we just talked about, to our culture and values. We wanted to make sure people were aligned on how we operate, and then continue to have those surprise and delight moments along the way. So we created something called Reconnect, and it's really a set of experiences that connect us to each other, connect us to why we're here at the company, and connect us to how we work. So we kicked it off in April with having our CEO go through our enhanced culture and values. And then in May, we did something really unique. We had an event we called Amplify. It was a 90-minute interactive and highly entertaining event globally, where we basically re-onboarded every employee. I hadn't been through new hire orientation since, for 9 years. And so we re-onboarded everybody and, went deep into culture and values and mission and vision. And then in June, we hosted another music festival. This was to connect us to each other, but it was virtual, obviously to do it around the world. But we also invited people to come in for viewing parties on the campus. And it turns out from our measurement scores, it was the highest amount of people we've had on our campus on a day since pre-pandemic. So people did want to come together. And in each month, we're going to feature a different thing. So, we've featured turning our focus to lifting up others with random acts of kindness. Coming up, we've got a decision-making framework that we want to go through on how we work. But one thing I do want to mention is in November, we're going to host Reconnect Day. And this is going back to the hybrid and remote. We're going to invite our hybrid teams to come into the office on that day to gather, to come to our company all hands. And then we're going to have a variety of activities and workshops and learning opportunities and more on that day as they come together. For our remote employees, we've created this concept of neighborhoods. So let's say there's a whole bunch of employees who have moved to South Florida. Well, they may not be sitting in an office together, but they're in a regional area together. So we have now neighborhood champions. They're going to be bringing people together in a virtual way, having a similar experience, having their own sense of community. And it's a pilot. We're going to experiment. And if this goes well, it's something we might replicate. And these experiences are going to continue through May of next year, May of 2023. And that's when we celebrate our 20th birthday celebration. So this is a big body of work that there's a whole bunch of us focused on it. It's been pretty fun.
Wow, 20th birthday. It's been that long already.
Yeah.
Well, I love how I just put in the chat. I love how you've taken an incentive approach, a carrot approach to drawing people back into the workplace. I think that's so much healthier than, this stick approach. You must be in the office, these days per week. There's a company I won't name. You all probably read it in the news yesterday or today that has said everybody back in the office 5 days a week, no exceptions. And I just find that a little juvenile, frankly. And I just love the more adult and mature approach that LinkedIn has taken.
Thank you, Kevin. And again, we're learning as we go.
Tom, any final thoughts for Nina before we wrap up?
Yeah, I wanted to second your point that she's a quote machine. I really love and also just a great initiative and program leader. The re-onboarding, you're getting a lot of kudos from folks in the chat. I think that's a wonderful notion. And just your description of culture, culture is one of those nebulous terms. And if you ask the person on the street, you'd probably get as many definitions as there are people on the street. When I think of culture, I often think of sort of the way we do things here, the way work gets done. And that's certainly an element of it. But I loved your description of collective personality of the organization. I'm going to steal that and add that in as well as the more production oriented aspect. So good stuff.
Right.
Well, thank you both. Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Nina, we're so thrilled you could join us today, and hopefully we can do more of this with you going forward, because you're just a fantastic guest. And I really am such a fan of the organization overall, and I can see why the organization has done so well over the years with you having your hand in so many different areas of human capital. I'm sure it's made a huge difference.
Takes a village. Takes a village.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. And that's great to hear. 20-year anniversary. I don't think many of us on the call had profiles in 2023 on LinkedIn, but we started up there pretty soon after, and it's obviously been an important part of our work lives and now beyond that as well. So
Wonderful.
Keep up the good work. I'm just going to wrap things up here by again noting we'll be back on Getting Hybrid Work Right, this particular call series. Every other Thursday. Our next meeting, of course, will be September 15th, where we'll have Dr. Russell Robinson, who's with the Department of Health and Human Services. So a little bit different, having someone from the federal government and how they're dealing with hybrid and flexible work with us. So come join us on the 15th for that. And again, a reminder that registration is open for our Next Practices Now conference in late March this year in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was great to be back earlier this year at the conference. Next year in 2023, we'll be there again. It's an annual tradition that we're super excited to be back to after 2 years of being virtual only. As you see here, it is both in person and virtual. So if you can't make it in Scottsdale, you do have that other option. And there'll be a lot more information coming on the speaker lineup very soon. So once again, I want to thank you, Kevin, co-host, as always. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll thank John Boudreau for the surprise appearance here too. So thanks, John, for coming off mute and joining us today. Again, Nina, you're awesome, and I hope to talk to you again real soon.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Take care.
See you soon. Bye-bye.